So we are joined this week by David Jacob as part of our weekly mindset course, basically. So I started at the beginning of the week with a coaching couch session about mindset and body language. And I thought this would be a good guest to have this week. So floor to you to introduce yourself, David.
Thanks, Millie. So my name is David. I work with founders anywhere between $1 million or $500,000 and $1.5 million. The goal is to scale them and then scale their sales teams. But the focus that I kind of put on how I do my work is all through the lens of psychology and then sales psychology.
Let's dig in then. So what is the biggest problem, I guess, with mindset that people have when they come to you? Is it that they don't have it, or is their perspective on what mindset is just incorrect?
I think a lot of the conversation around mindset comes from so Carol Dweck did this, seminal work on growth versus fixed mindsets, and that kind of took over the landscape, and now everyone is aware of how much mindset plays into business and life and whatever else. And then a lot of stuff came out after that about how mindset impacts sports people, and then as a result mindset conversation shifted to business pretty naturally between sport and business. Now I think, and this is Millie asked me how inflammatory am I going to be before we got on the podcast, and I think this is probably this is probably one of those things that I'm slightly inflammatory about. Is I think mindset is viewed very much as a tool instead of as a state of being.
As what you mean, a state of your mind, basically.
Right, exactly. And I think when people get into the habit of ascribing themselves to a certain way of thinking about mindset, right? Even if it is something as simple as, I have a growth mindset instead of a fixed mindset. Well, that's great in theory, but in practice, because of the nature of how mindset is talked about, no one wants to admit that they don't have a growth mindset. And they might self-identify as having one, but in practice, when push comes to shove, they actually don't have one, and they're very fixed in how they think. And that is probably one of the biggest things that I deal with founders very early on. Even, trying to get founders to admit that they need sales coaching is difficult enough. Simply
it's
because
an ego thing, surely. It's like an ego approach to how they see themselves, like id versus ego, how you think you are, how you actually are, and how people perceive you.
Yeah, precisely that. And the toughest part of that, especially, starting out early on, is how do you get past the initial gut instinct of something that that you should be able to do, which is, go out and sell your product. Especially most founders tend to have ego problems regardless. That's why they become entrepreneurs. But when you then translate that into a sales, arena, you end up in this very unfortunate position where that thing of, well, I don't need help with this, is the thing that will eventually end up holding you back. Because the people who end up in, founder positions who are sales-led, right, what I call sales-led founders, oftentimes are quite weak across the other two problems, right? So they might be really great at sales, but they might be technically deficient, right? Or they might be operationally deficient. And those tech or sales-focused founders are very quick to hire in for those other roles. Oftentimes, when you reverse that and you have someone who's ops-focused or tech-focused, they know that they want to hire in for those roles, but because they have zero understanding or zero ability to become sales-led founders, they oftentimes end up hiring in for someone just to do the job for them without any basis of knowing how to do the job themselves. And that's where you get really slow growth in companies. So,
and I guess, is that because, is it the better approach than you, in an ideal world, you'd then come and coach the entire C-suite company or the initial group of founders so that they all work on things that they don't have, they need to improve, and vice versa, so they all become part of one team and machine? Because I guess coaching for an ops person is different to coaching for a salesperson and a coaching for a tech person. But do you find that when you come to people the sales coaches that come to you, they are aware of this as a problem? Do they come in and be are they super narcissistic and ego driven about the fact that, yes, I know how to do sales, I have a growth mindset? Or do you have a lot of times that people will just come in and be I know nothing, I just want to sell?
Yeah. So it's really interesting. So I have this dichotomy with one of my clients, and they do exceptionally well. And the growth that we've seen over the last, 3 or 4 months has been fantastic. One of them is your classic, like, excellent salesperson, born and bred, super charismatic, like very good on the phones, like just gets it from point zero. He has the ego problem where in his own mind, he doesn't need help with sales. Sales help is fine, and he's prepared to accept the feedback and whatever, but it's viewed through the lens of I'm already good at the thing.
Yes, yeah.
His co-founder is so ops brained. Like everything has to be frameworked, everything has to be logic based. Like you have to explain every single tiny element to him, and then he'll piece it together in his head, and it's like, oh, okay, I get it now. Now, with him, he came in under the premise that, like, I don't know anything about sales. Like, teach me and I'll learn it. That person is as good at sales now as his sales co-founder, simply because one is willing to kind of go, I can be humble and say I don't know anything, and the other one's like, I know everything I need to know, but I'm going to cherry pick what I need from you. So how does it happen? I think it's more often than not people who know that sales is not something that they are inherently or intuitively good at, come in and see massive jumps, right? And then people look at them and go, wow, you're so great at sales. And their first response is, I wasn't. I got help and now I'm here.
But it's the openness, I guess, that you say, like the humble, willing to learn rather than. And do you think it's like nature versus nurture? So do you think some people are just born like that, or is there like charisma? You either have or you don't. But some people can fake charisma that I found. So do you find like with salespeople, they will often like fake it till they become charismatic, or when you start peeling the layers, are they actually different in their core from nature and nurture to someone that's like super ops or super technical?
So I think one of the, and I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who's a sales director at a 8-figure revenue company, very well known for being great salespeople there. And his argument was you can train sales, but there is going to be a very natural cap at where someone will get to simply based on like nature. That's one of the things that I fundamentally disagree with. The reason, and I understand his perspective, the reason that I think a lot of sales leaders and, founders, CEOs, etc., have that view is because the nature element is, from what I've found, an ability to understand logic, but not in the sense of like A equals B equals C, in the sense of like, do I understand how people think? Can I put my essentially common sense, right? Like it sounds ridiculous, but
I agree.
A lot of people just don't have common sense, right?
I found that as well. Like we've worked together, and I think common sense is not as common as it would make you think it is.
Right. And the most difficult part for sales leaders, and I talk about this a lot, I'm writing a book at the moment. The most difficult part for sales leaders is you kind of want to optimize on the front end via hiring for people who do have that, because at that point you can teach frameworks and structures and guidance very, very easily, and it's very easy to fit a square peg in a square hole. But if someone comes in and that intuitive logic isn't there,
you can't really train that.
You can't really train it. So it's just not worth the hassle. Whereas in my work with founders, because I don't have the luxury of saying, oh, well, if you don't think like this, you're screwed. Yeah, like I have to be able to teach that. But what I found is you can teach almost anyone that fundamental logic, right? And if you can teach someone how people think, at that point, it's very, very, very easy to get that person at the same level as an exceptional intuitive salesperson, simply because now all of the traits that the exceptional salesperson is deficient on, they don't have the technical knowledge, they don't have the ops brain. Now they're playing into their strengths already, right? So I like to explain this to founders. Anything above, the middle of mid-market sales to enterprise is just project management. You can be the best salesperson in the world. It really doesn't mean anything if you're really shit at project management. Because all you're doing is nurturing a deal through its logical stages to get it to the end point. And that could take 6 months, 8 months, 12 mons, 3 years, right?
It's like a project. It's like a Gantt chart that you need to make. Yeah.
So,
and is that how it's seen? Sorry, is that how it's seen usually? Like in enterprise roles, do they perceive something in sales as a project management role as well?
Yeah. Okay. Anyone who's in enterprise sales knows that like PMing the deal is 90% of the work. Like, yeah, you still need all of the soft skills, right? The quote unquote soft skills that make someone a good salesperson to get to the root of the problems and understand impact and all the rest of it. Fine, yeah. But deals are won and lost in that nurturing
time. Yeah.
So for most people, if I can get someone who's ops brained, all of the same, intuitive sales abilities as someone who has it naturally and then just gets good at project management, the people I train are going to beat yours 100 times out of 100 because they're already, they're all of their skill points, all of their XP has been put into ops first.
Yeah.
They intuitively think like that.
Finalizing thing at the top rather than you're teaching something the core of what they do. Yeah.
Exactly.
Interesting. I never thought of it that way. And do you find that like geographically as well, are founders in the UK, do they have different like ego problems, and like when they come to you, are they different points than let's say a US founder?
Oh my God.
It drastically? But it's again with that, is it nurture versus nature? Like culturally, is it just how people have been like raised, grown?
So looking at it from a macro perspective and trying to delineate geographically leads you down, I think, a very much like a man with a hammer, like blunt tool approach to this.
Yeah.
Painting with very broad brushstrokes. People in the US tend to be a lot more gregarious. They tend to be way better natural communicators than people in the UK. They tend to say what they mean. They're very direct. All of that works very well within a sales context. However, the flip side of that, the negative associated with that, is that oftentimes people in the US will get accused of being pushy. They'll be accused of being domineering, right? All of these things that are the unfortunate, like, other side of the coin from the positive trait also come with it. Now, in the UK, the positives are we're way better at being able to like navigate the nuance of a conversation.
Yes.
We're way better at being
like you're being sold. It's more like a holistic, a collaborative approach to buying. Yeah.
Exactly that. Now, the downside of that is deals take way longer, right? That both of the things on either side, right, that are negatives are very easily solvable. However, they're predicated on under the idea that this is just how we are when you look at it through nature. And that is in and of itself problematic because that's a foregone conclusion, right? By that logic, no one in England should be able to close a deal in a month. And that's just not true.
It just happens. Yeah.
Right. So the way that I teach it is far more micro. So the reason that my clients see such great results in such a short time span is because the first 3 or 4 hours is just mindset work.
Yeah.
It's just removing what I call bad code. So imagine your brain is a computer. You're born with the hardware. The hardware is never going to change, right? Unfortunately, you get what you're given. Now, throughout your entire life, whether it's your parents, the school system that you grew up in, the part of the country that you grew up in, the friends that you had, the university you went to or not, the media you consume, books you read, blah, 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 etc., are all going to be the equivalent of software that you put onto or into that hardware. Now, unfortunately, that software is going to come with bad code. Completely, unintentionally, it is going to then rewire how you see the world and how you view the world so that certain things are acceptable, certain things aren't, certain things are right, certain things are wrong. So one of the most common things that I have to kind of work out with founders, and it is, a completely disparate group of issues, right? And I'm not trying to bucket anyone into everyone has this problem because I just think it's too difficult to do that. But one of the big problems that I find with founders is if you grew up with either one, absent parents, or two, very domineering parents, you suffer the same fault, right? And I call it a fault because that's what it is, right? If you come with those problems, oftentimes you tend to be very placative towards prospects. You'll allow prospects to walk all over you because that is literally the life you have led.
And the dynamic you're used to. You're not used to being the domineering one in a conversation. Yeah.
So as a result, irrespective of whether you're from the US or the UK, that same thing will happen at a much more micro level based on the stuff that's happened to you as a child, right? Now, my clients affectionately refer to the first 3 or 4 hours as sales therapy, but because that's kind of what it is, right? Like, but if I can find out,
you're going to try and figure out what their core pain points are, what they need to learn. You kind of have to do quite deep work with them.
Yeah, exactly that. So, for example, one of my clients, we found out, in our first session that the relationship with his dad that he'd had was predicated on him wanting to show his dad all the time that, look at me, the stuff that I'm doing is actually worthwhile and valuable.
Mm.
Look at me, look at me, look at me, like trying to just desperately
That
wanting his dad's
approval.
affection and
Yeah.
approval, right?
Yeah.
And we unearthed this, and I was like, dude, until you fix the relationship with your dad, you're just going to keep like bending over backwards to show prospects how smart you are, to show them, look at me, look at me, look at me, look at this, all of this amazing stuff that we've done. Until you deal with that, this is going to keep coming up, no matter how much we try and get you to not do it, even if it's stuff like, prospects coming to them right as the deal's about to go through and going, hey, look, like, I want to be able to speak to 5 of your previous clients. On the face of it, it doesn't seem like there's anything wrong with that, right? Like, they just want to make sure that what we're doing is reasonable.
It makes sense. Yeah.
Why? What possible reason do you have?
I guess they don't believe what they're being sold.
Right.
Why
don't they
where
believe
he's
they're being
kind of
sold?
failed in his role as a salesperson. Is it?
Right.
But do you think that he doesn't believe in what he's been selling, or it's also the subconscious psychological things where he's constantly asking for approval, so it makes it seem as if he's getting them to validate what he's selling rather than him believing in what he's saying?
Exactly that.
Interesting.
Right. And then when someone comes to you,
it's a lot of like self-reflective work that they have to do to realize this.
100%. And everyone has bad code, right? Me included. Like, I'm still finding bad code in the work that I do. That's why I work with practitioners to be like, help me get over this thing, or unearth this thing that I didn't even realize. Because until you do it, you're always going to be less effective than you could be. So
it's like the self-awareness thing. Like, you could sweep through life assuming you're the best and not realizing that there's anything, like you say, bad code, until you meet someone who might be the same as you and you start nitpicking their problems without realizing you're just mirroring and finding your own faults in them.
Yeah, exactly that. And the really interesting part is when you go to this level, the one of the things that I find, because a lot of the founders that I work with are quite young. They're younger than me, some of them under 25, and they have a super, almost like a gung-ho mindset when it comes to growing their businesses, which is awesome. However,
like hungry to
oh yeah, they're hungry probably doesn't even cut it. They're like desperate to grow, right? And they work at a level that, the average 30-year-old would never be able to maintain for longer than a week or so. But one of my clients wakes up at 5 a.m. every day and works almost continuously until 8 p.m. and does it every single day. And he loves it. He lives for it.
He's gonna burn out. He's not going to make it to 30 at this rate.
He's going to burn out. But that's the difference, right? In our mind, as people who have kind of like gone past that period of time, cast your mind back to when you were 21.
Yeah.
You were able to do stuff that now would kill you in a week.
Yeah.
But when you're 21, you just have that, you have that natural resilience, right? You're like rubber, like your bones are like rubber. Throw you against the wall, you're going to bounce straight back.
And also you're just starting, so it's not like you have the like rejections and stuff to pull you down, or like the awareness for other things that are going on with your life. You're like, I just want to grow and develop
100%.
something.
Right. Now, the problem that founders like that face is that they're moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour. And when you're moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour, the small things become big things. The big things become insurmountable. And at some point, there is going to come a problem that you're going to go, oh God, how do I deal with this? And then you'll stop.
Yeah.
Because
and you lose momentum. Yeah. It's like a shark, right? If you stop moving, exactly you die. Yeah.
So for them, the best thing that I've found is get them to slow down, which is counterintuitive. They don't want to do it. It seems illogical that they would need to do it because look at how much growth we're going. Look at all the stuff we're doing.
Slowing down is better than dying when you stop and dying. Like, you're mitigating an inevitable that will happen at some point.
Yeah. So at the end of one of the first sessions with one of my clients, his business doubled in 4 months, right? So like absolutely crushed it. He closed it. Really? I asked him at the end of our first session, I said, are you happy? And he paused and he was like, I don't know. Never really thought about it. I was like, okay.
It's a bit sad. That's quite a sad. How old is he?
21.
Oh, that's heartbreaking.
But I asked him, are you happy? And he was like, I don't know. I've never thought about it. And I was like, okay, well, why do you run the business? Like, what is the function of it? He was like, I just want to have a massive impact. I want to be able to do this. I want to say that I built this by myself, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, okay, anything else? And he was like, yeah, I want to be able to take care of my mom. And I was like, okay, great. Like, what does that look like? And we worked through it. And to retire his mum, he needed to be able to give her, a couple of grand a month. He had more than enough money to do that. More than enough. And I was like, okay, so if you were able to, let's say at the beginning of next month, just be like, cool, this amount of money is going to mum every month. Tick that off. Would that make you happy? And he's like, yeah. Oh my God. That made me so happy. I was like, okay, do it.
Do it.
And it was like a light bulb went off in his head.
Bring a horse to water, like now. Do it yourself.
Right? It's exactly that. And it was like, huh. As a result of that, he now kind of dropped the I'm just growing it for growing its sake idea. Now the growth in the business had a purpose. It wasn't just I'm growing it because I just repeat the same thing, grind every day. It was now, okay, there's a reason behind the stuff that I do. All the decisions I make are going to make it easier for me to, retire my dad next or whatever.
Yeah, there's like he's working towards a goal, not to the point that I guess in this he's got the control that he'll end it when he wants to, rather than vice versa. He'll probably have to stop because he will, like you said, burn out or some other small little issue will take over his mindset.
Yeah.
And do you find, so I know we said a lot of them are really quite young. Is it different to like if you were to coach someone that's say like 30 plus? Are they quite like harder to train because they are, I guess, older and they refuse to change?
Yeah, 100%. So there's an interview with a guy called Ty Lopez, who's a very well-renowned internet marketer. And I think it was on Impact Theory. I can't remember. He says something along the lines of trying to coach anyone over the age of 25 is pointless. Simply because they've already learned everything that they want to learn.
Yeah, your
They
brain
have no desire to change.
Fully closed, and you don't.
And the neuroplasticity argument, I think, is a little bit weak, right? Like people pick up instruments when they get old, and it's not impossible.
People learn languages, and they're like,
yeah, exactly. I think it's cope, if I'm honest, but I can understand the logic, right? Like the clients that I work with who are sub 25, like they take to it like a duck to water, and they're just like, oh my God, wow, this is so easy now. Versus the people who are older, you're battling against code that has existed in your brain for like 20.
So it's just
30
harder.
years.
It's just a longer journey, I guess. Yeah.
So this is where this infuriates a lot of my clients. So I have this overarching idea of life is as hard or as easy as you make it, which intuitively drives people mental. Because
it makes them their own, like they're the decider of their own life. But that is true. Like you can't just, I guess people don't want to take responsibility and accountability for themselves. It's easier to blame something else.
Yep, 100%, right? And as a result of that, one of the things that I hear from my clients is, it's really hard to find people who are going to be great clients and they'll, pay what we want, and everyone's trying to nickel and dime us. And my answer to that is, well, life is as hard or as easy as you make it. Are you making it hard for yourself, or is it hard by default? And they're like, well, it's hard by default. Okay, well, do you have on your website, for example, do you have prices displayed? No. Why not? Oh, well, then, people probably wouldn't book calls and get on the phone. Why? Well, because the prices might scare them off. Why would the prices scare them off?
Come back round to the full circle. Yeah.
Why would the prices scare them off? Because they're poor and they can't afford it.
Yeah.
Oh.
You're looking at the wrong people then. Like, find someone easier to sell to.
Right. Ergo, are you making life harder or are you making life easier? You're making life harder.
And do they see it like that? Are they quite, I guess, does it take a long time for them to visualize that they need to sort of shift their, I guess, ICP or whatever their clients are?
100%. And that's, that's a very finite example. So let me use a different one. So within the context of a sales team, right? Getting really good data is the limiting issue for us being able to book more calls. Right? Very common with, sales teams with SDRs that are on the phone. We just can't get good enough data. Okay. Interesting. How many calls do your team do a day? Oh, well, we make them manually prospect, 20 people every single day and then do dials to that. Okay, great. What about the rest of their time? Oh, well, we've seen call outcomes reduce if they do more than 20. Okay. What if they didn't have to manually prospect and you handed them the list and told them just to dial it? Oh, but then they wouldn't build the skills. Are you making life harder or are you making life easier?
Yeah. Also,
Either.
why do you need to manually do it in 2025? Like,
right? But like these are all of the examples that I can point to, which is like you're making life harder, right? You've set these arbitrary standards or rules or whatever within an organization that now you're forcing people to attend to. Whereas if you made their lives easier, would you get the outcome that you wanted? Probably. But for some reason, you don't want to make life easy. And oftentimes when you have people managing sales teams, the answer is, well, I never got to do that. It wasn't easy.
It's like a legacy code thing that you're saying, like, but is it the same thing where it's like, why should their life be easy if mine wasn't? Or was it that they don't know the skill because they never taught it themselves? Like they're only, like I found previously, like if someone tells me we've always done it like this, and you ask like, well, why? And they're like, well, I don't know. And I'm like, but do you know what you're even doing? Or are you just following like a recipe of stuff? So when things go up, do you find that with sales teams as well, where they don't want to make other people's lives easier? Is it A, because they're like, well, no one did it for me? Or is it because they don't actually know what they're doing? So it's like a scapegoat.
So the my response to the second question, right? You don't know. If you don't know when your taxes are due, does the government care?
No, because ignorance is not an excuse.
Ignorance is not a response, right? Like that is not a defense to a crime. Figure it out, right? So like,
but then again, we go back to this common sense thing we spoke about earlier, where that is just, if you don't know something, like either figure it out or read up on it. But people just are like either lazy or they're like, why would I? Someone else will do it.
Exactly. So fundamentally, it comes down to personal responsibility and a level of introspection to say, I don't know everything. I'm still prepared to be a learner, right?
I guess this ties back to what you said at the beginning about whether or not the ego aspect. And then, like, I guess to with people that you work with now, I guess it's more like Western Hemisphere. Have you worked with a Western? Yeah. Have you worked with anybody on the East? Is their approach to the sales vastly different? Just because I guess, like you said, society versus UK, US, society, culture.
So my honest answer is I've never done it. So without doing it, I'm teaching exactly like everyone else is, which is like, here are some principles or some frameworks that I've seen work in the past, man with a hammer. Try it, it works, right? And then if it doesn't work, then I'm like, oh, well, you didn't do it right because it works everywhere else. And that's just not an answer. It's not a reasonable answer. Now, do I think that, places that are culturally similar, it can have very similar effects? Yes, absolutely. I have clients in places in Europe that use the exact same stuff that works in the UK and in the US. They just do it in Spanish, for example.
It's just a language change,
and it doesn't really change anything. Now, do I know necessarily whether that's going to work in India, the Far East, Russia, etc.? I have no idea, simply because I've never sold in those places. I don't know culturally how different sales calls are, quote unquote, meant to go. So I have no idea of the potential impact. Now, do I think that, people are still fundamentally people and there's probably a degree to which all of it will work? Sure. But I have zero data.
Nuances that you can, But then do you think, so you were saying about the US, UK clients, do you think, is it easier for US salespeople to sell to their own people versus trying to sell, let's say, a US salesperson selling to the UK and vice versa? Because you said that's just the way they like to be sold. So
it kind of goes back to the thing I was saying earlier, right? Like fundamentally, people are still people. And with the benefit of like, macro cultural similarities versus micro cultural differences, it's quite easy to sell when the language is the same and the culture is similar. I've sold into the US basically since my sales career started with no issues. I know Americans who have sold into the UK with no issues. Do I think that, there is you should be almost localized to your own geography? No. Do I think that you can learn very easily how to navigate the cultural nuance? Yes. Do I think that most people can't be bothered to do the work? Also, yes. Right. So, like,
I guess that's why it comes back to your coaching, like the mindset stuff. you need to take it to the core before you start building other blocks to start selling. I think once you scrape it back, when people work on themselves, it probably must be easier once you've realized what your pain points are and your weaknesses. When you work on that, then it's just easier once you read your own problems, other people's problems, just to sell to whoever, basically. But you adapt to who you're selling to.
100%.
Fascinating. And how do you see your future as a career coach? What's next other than book?
So I think the big realization that I've had is the way that I teach sales is so fundamentally different, right? It's focused on fundamentally different things. The mechanisms of teaching are what I call principle focused versus method and tactics. So the way that I've kind of conceptualized learning, and I've probably stolen this from somewhere, and I've just forgotten that I've done it. But at the base part of this pyramid are principles. These are the timeless kind of like basic building blocks of our understanding of, X, Y, and Z. From those principles, methods are derived. Methods are, for example, your classic sales methodologies, your MEDDIC, your MEDPIC, your BANT, whatever, right? All of those are derived from principles. From those methods, you can derive tactics. Now, not all methods are sales frameworks. Sales frameworks are an example of methods. Right? Now, because methods are really easy to teach, all of the teaching is around methods, right? All you need to do is walk them through this framework and it works. Don't change it. Don't screw around with it. Just do what you're told, right? That is way easier to get everyone up to a set standard or level versus trying to teach from principles. So the way that I explain this is when you look at like the first sales books, like books that salespeople read if they wanted to get good, you've got, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Carnegie. I'm trying to think of like other big ones, like A Happy Pocket Full of Money. All of these books, none of which were directly focused on how to be a good salesman.
They're just more like reading people how to manipulate, how to do stuff like that.
We tend to not use the word manipulate, but
is it wrong?
Yeah, it's not wrong insofar as it's just a little bit unpalatable. No one wants to be told that you're teaching people how to manipulate.
I'm sorry, but how to influence people? Isn't that just another word for manipulate?
Influence and manipulation are very slightly different, but no, I take your point. They're basically the same thing.
This is what we're talking about, how abrasive we're going to be on this. Me.
But so all of those books taught ideas or principles that are helpful to a salesperson, right? In like the I would argue the 80s, sales methodologies became the thing that sales books were made out of. You had books like Spin Selling. There's a few more that I'm forgetting, but Spin Selling is the obvious example that kind of catapulted into the mainstream, right? The Sandler sales methodology became prominent in the 80s. All of these things focused on adding a methodology to sales. Well, at that point, the only thing that we had, i.e., the thing that was easiest to teach, were those methods. Since then, we just kept teaching method, and the principles got left behind because that's way more difficult to teach.
It's just harder to teach principles. 50%
of the people probably aren't going to be able to get it. So let's just teach the method. Everyone can have this printed out, sat in front of them, and then work through it. That's way better versus teaching from principles.
It's like all frameworks, like all the certifications of like a Prince 2 and Six Sigma. I find it actually, funnily enough, I don't think you've watched the other episode that I had, but I said it's just a piece of paper. You're paying for a framework. It teaches you rules, but it's a lot harder for people to learn how to actually read people and to do the self-reflective work to understand other people. That then make you a better person to be able to master something like an ops stuff. Like I was saying, specifically for like one of the certifications thing was Six Sigma or Lean. Like it's great when everything's going by the book, but it doesn't tell you whether someone's burnt out, why someone's not engaging, why there's like hiccups that you can't easily pinpoint. But to get that, you need to have this other like instinctual human side. But like the way you're saying with principles, that's really no one has time to learn that because it takes a lot of time and a lot of trial and error and a lot of like just sitting in the wild, I guess, just figuring out whether it's working and then trying to replicate it in like a business setting.
Yeah, exactly.
But fascinating. I didn't realize that, like, I mean, obviously from the perspective of someone funnily enough, who doesn't know anything about sales. Like, it makes sense. Like, everything you're saying is very commonsensical, but if you don't understand, I guess it also, there's certain people that go into sales. Not everyone's like, I really want to be a salesperson, just because either A, like you said, they don't know what they're doing, or they don't think they could be a good salesperson. But when you go down to it, like you said, everyone's just people. And again, you can be born with it, but it's also very easy to learn if you invest the time in it.
Yeah.
But I fear that like not a lot of people have a lot of, like, everyone invests time about like fitness and eating healthy and well-being, but you very rarely invest on like personal and professional development in this capacity. Because I assume you're gonna hear stuff that you might not like, and people don't want that. Like, you don't want to have a very pessimistic, like what you're saying about your client, that he was always like seeking approval from his dad. Like, nobody wants to hear that at like 25, 30, when you thought you've passed it, you thought that you're like dealt with it.
And I think a lot of people come into, and it's one of the big bits of feedback that I hear at the end of the mindset sessions is like, is this what you expected? And they're like, no, of course not. I came to you for sales coaching, and instead we're talking about my parents.
Crying. But they must come back and like give you feedback about like, oh, actually, I spoke to my parents about this, or like I've used what you've helped me uncover in other aspects of my life, not just like sales.
Yeah, 100%.
So it must be worthwhile. They must see it as like, I didn't think that this is what's going to happen, but I'm actually kind of glad that it did, because you kind of push them along the way to do the self-reflective work that they might not do themselves otherwise.
Yeah, exactly that. So like there's one thing. So I was very fortunate, and I got to go to a like a leadership seminar basically, and got to sit in and watch it. And it's run by this guy called Nate Bailey, who was in the US Armed Forces, like just a phenomenally accomplished, competent leader in and of himself. And now he does these leadership trainings for C-suites. And he got these, ragtag group of guys, probably about 10, 15 of them. And right at the start of the day, he gives them a backpack. And in the backpack is a notepad, a pen, a water bottle, and a towel, and the backpack. And they line them up all outside this classroom. And they say, okay, your task as a group, you need to go in, find a seat, hang your backpack with both straps on the back of your chair, take everything out of it, put it on the table. Everyone's has to be the exact same. It has to be uniform. And you've got 45 seconds to do it. Enter the classroom, sit down, put it all down. Everything's got to be uniform. That's the rule. That was the only task, right? Intuitively, you look at that and you're like, you have to be a moron to screw this up.
Yeah. I
sat in that room for 45 minutes while this group of C-suite guys whose cumulative businesses probably did about 50 to 100 million a year fucked this up for an hour.
An hour.
It is inconceivable, right? But the reason that they fucked it up is because when you get given an instruction like that, everything has to be uniform is the last thing that you think about, right? You remember the instructions, but the uniformity is the last thing. They got all the way through. They managed to do it in 45 seconds, right? Everything has to be uniform is basically the watchword, right? And they pulled them for the previous, like 30 minutes. They pulled them for everything, right? People's water bottles being in different spots, right? People's pens being facing the wrong way, right? Like military level precision. When they say uniform, they meant it. And they finally got it through, and they're going around and they're checking it. And they get to the final person. Everyone in the room at this point, including us, have our like holding our breaths, being like, have they finally managed it? And they pull one of the guys and they go, I want you to check everyone and tell me if everything's uniform. Pulls him and he checks everything and they're like, yeah, it's uniform. They go, no, it's not. And at this point, we're confused. They're even more confused because they finally managed to do it. And he goes, okay, I want you to look at the people. And he goes, there's two people wearing hats. There's people with their shirts untucked versus tucked in. They are not uniform. The task has been done. But
it's like everything needs to be uniform.
Everything needs to be uniform, right? And at the end of this, they tell them there are 4 rules for life. And I teach my clients these same 4 rules for life. I have them burned into my skull because literally these 4 rules make you a competent human being. And it's one of the first things I get my clients to go into. And again, going back to the thing that we said earlier, it's common sense. Common common sense needs to be codified, right?
It needs to be taught in schools, I think. You can't leave preschool if you don't know how to be.
But I genuinely think that if everyone at the age of like 12 was taught these 4 rules, like life, the world, and everything in it would just be infinitely easier and better. So, rule 1, leaders lead. There is going to come a point in any group activity where everyone is going to sit on their hands and wait for leadership. You included, everyone, right? Someone is going to have to step up.
Naturally, yeah.
Right? There are going to be people who step up intuitively, right? The people who have natural leadership qualities are going to step up and put themselves forward. Now, what happens if that person is useless and they just love the ego stroke of being the leader? You know that you're the most competent, but someone beat you to the punch simply because they wanted to be the star of the show. What are you going to do then? Right? Equally, on the flip side,
like just another person, like a sheep,
100%. On the flip side, what happens if nobody has that natural leadership quality and you've got 10 competent people in the room who are all sat there like lemons, not
just
doing
waiting
anything?
for someone else.
Right? Leaders lead. You lead from the front. That means you do everything, right? If you want to set the standard for an organization, you're in the trenches too. If you want people to be doing ABC, that means you have to do it and show them what good looks like, right? Leaders have to lead, right? Second thing, details matter. That exercise was the perfect visual representation of details matter.
Especially people who are C-suite, like they're meant to be leaders leading, and they themselves don't know what they're doing.
Right. And most of the time, people have this idea that I'm either detail oriented or I'm not. And the people who aren't are like, oh, that's just, it's my fatal flaw, right? Who cares, right? But if you're a leader, if you're a C-suite exec and details don't matter, well, what happens when you realize that, the books have been slightly misaligned?
Will you ever realize, or will you end up being arrested and then being told you should have realized?
Right. What happens when, you actively, because you're busy, show up late every meeting? You're 2 minutes late for everything. What happens then? Right. And the example that one of the guys leading the course gave was, my daughter is currently pregnant. I am in Nashville, Tennessee. I need to drive all the way out to somewhere in like coastal Georgia, which was at least, a 5 or 6 hour drive. Like, it's not close. And she called him that morning and she said, hey, the baby's being delivered at 9 a.m. tomorrow. And that it wasn't are you going to be here? Like, are you going to make it? It was as simple as, it's being delivered at 9 a.m. And he was like, okay, cool. Because his daughter knows that if she says 9 a.m., he will be there before 9 a.m.
Yeah.
His logic is, you have to treat every single like timestamp thing in your mind as the equivalent of that. Because if you're 2 minutes late to the birth of your grandson, there's no,
everything else is like unnecessary. Because if that's the most important thing in your life at the moment, and you're like,
right? Oh, I'm sorry, I got caught in traffic, or I couldn't find a car parking space, whatever, right? It doesn't matter if you miss that, right? The important thing is, were you there or weren't you? That becomes binary. So details matter. The third one is be open. You got to be open to feedback. You got to be open to praise. You got to be open to everything. You got to be open to new experiences. You have to be, if you want to be a great leader, the biggest thing that you can do is be open to everything, right? When someone who is super junior comes in and says, hey, I think we're doing this wrong, or I think our focus is elsewhere, and you go, shut up, you don't know what you're talking about. I've been running this company for 20 years.
Isn't it? This is tied to ego, with leaders,
100%, right? So just from those three alone, you have a framework on how not to be useless. The fourth one is the thing that ties it all together, right? You have to be all in all the time. Because what I find with most founders that I coach is they're all in on some things most of the time. And as a result of that, everything suffers.
Yeah, you either want to do it properly or don't do it at all. Don't half-ass. These like, not that I've ever been in the military, but these sound like very similar, like army rules. Like the pedantic about your bed has to be made in a certain way, everyone's uniform has to be in a certain way. Like, I mean, it makes sense why conscription used to be mandatory. Like, I get why.
I'm in no way, I mean, I'm not, as someone I know would say to me, I have soft hands. I'm not meant to be a military man by any extent. However, however, if you look at places that still use conscription, you know, despite any positive or negative impact societally, culturally,
we're moving more away, just the forced learning of these rules.
Abide by these rules. Make sure you hit them. Do not let anything come between A and B. Albert enjoying a squeaky toy. Making sure that you actually hit those things and they become de facto like
ingrained in
your head. Those countries tend to have really solid economies. They tend to have really good job prospects. They tend to do pretty well, right? The example that I have, my dad was born in Singapore. We have a bunch of family still over there. You do military service.
Yeah, even now, I think.
You do military service. You don't get an option. You go, right? And when I was a kid, like I went over and visited my cousins out there. And I remember seeing my cousins then. And then now, as I've seen them post-military service, I'm like, wow, yeah, this had a massive impact on you. You were a melt the last time I met you.
And now you do need it. Like, it's the thing what we were saying earlier about, like, some people will do the principles and some people will do the methodology. Methodology is like, maybe some people will, but for those that won't, you do need conscription. Because I think, like, not even to do with like leadership, and I'm not saying we should bring it back.
This is not advocating for conscription
at the moment. But it definitely makes sense also, I guess, at the time when, for example, in Serbia, when there was conscription, some people couldn't, like the areas of Serbia that weren't like main cities, people couldn't read and write. So this was a way to make sure that they entered like adulthood all on the same level, and they were all given a similar starting point, which was like, and again, I mean, like I said, I'm not pro-war or anything. I feel like we've gone off a weird tangent now, but I feel like just constantly repeating something into second nature. If in your core you are someone that will find excuses, not have motivation, like you said earlier about finding someone externally to help you with like therapy and stuff like that, this is it. They will drill it into you. You don't have an option.
You don't get a choice.
Do it or you punish you, basically.
Yeah. And I think that is, and one of the things that my clients say after we've kind of done this exercise of getting them to go through and like understand the benefits and also like the things that are missing from their life from not abiding by these rules is my clients know that if they're 2 minutes late to a call, like I won't be there.
Yeah, it's also kind of time as well at the end. Yeah,
but for me, it's not about it not being worth my time, right? It's like you didn't show up for this. That's on you.
Yeah.
I was here when I was meant to be. You weren't.
Yeah. But again, it goes from the perspective of you are investing in yourself and you're forcing yourself to retrain what you're coded from before. Yeah.
100%. So a lot of the stuff that I focus on is the individual psychology, because if you can fix that, if you can get someone to a point where they are like in their own mind, they know what they're doing. Sales is easy. Sales is the easy part of what I do.
But it's like the mental mindset aspect of it. So instead of a sales coach, should you not train to be like a therapist or a psychologist?
So
think of the masses you could help. This is a very niche group of salespeople. You could have like 1,000 clients.
So yes and no. So I think, you know, from a purely moralistic sense, would this be really impactful? Sure. Do I think that it is particularly lucrative? No. Do I think that there becomes a ton of bureaucracy that I then have to deal with as a therapist? One of the things that you know, a couple of my clients who have gone through therapy have said is, well, I've done therapy for years and it was useless because I never got anything out of it. I couldn't take anything. I was never told, hey, fix this, do this.
Yeah, it's a lot more like soft hands approach.
I'm not soft-handed.
You might be the next like innovative approach to therapy. It's like I'll break you down.
Telling people that everything is their fault and they need to change. Yeah, I don't think that would go well with the General Medical Council.
You never know. You can do like home study. I don't know, homeopathic approach. Oh, but interesting. But I think it makes sense though. Something from like a perspective of a role that works with people continuously. You need to have the psychological aspect because again, like I didn't realize how much of an effect. Like I thought you just sell a product, but again, people don't like you were saying earlier. They'll figure out that if you're not believing what that you sell, why would they buy it? Like, if you're not believing it, why? And then again, it comes more internally from that person. But is your book going to be about the 4 pillars?
The 4 pillars are going to be in it, but yeah,
Okay.
it's all around the idea of individual psychology and how you use that as the base point to then build principles that you need to understand for sales to make sales calls easy.
Fascinating. When's your book coming out?
It's a great question.
Is this your TED talk as well about? Is it going to be about?
Yeah, my TEDx will be around this as well. Yeah, so it's all interlinked. Yeah.
And
when it's coming out? Hopefully before the TEDx. TEDx is back end of June, so I've got to basically get it done in the next 2 months. So yeah, you get it done in the next 2 months.
With the book?
3 out of 10 chapters done, so not
okay. That's not good. Is that good momentum?
You'd have to ask my book coach, who's unhappy. So I'd argue that no.
I like that you have a book coach, though. A coach has a coach.
100%.
Yeah. Where? Tell me why.
I have a speaking coach for the TEDx. I have a coach for the book. I'm going on an abundance summit to help me become more abundant and making money easier. Like, coaches need coaches.
Practicing what you preach, though, which is good.
100%. You have to. Otherwise you're the same as everyone else who's like, no, I am the complete product. Everyone
I'm amazing. I don't need this.
Yeah. I'm not sales Jesus. This is not how that works.
Jesus. Is that going to be a book name when you come out?
Definitely not.
Sales Jesus 2.0. Oh, amazing. Thank you for this chat. I mean, like I said, I think going in from like just the common sense perspective, you have an outlook of what you think it would be, but you from again someone in operations, you don't know how intrinsically linked everything is, and if you don't have the 360, why do it?
Yeah, exactly that. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And I'll cut this here. Has it stopped?
No.
Why is it not stopping recording?